Hello my fellow weirdos, my name is Marie McWilliams. Welcome back to my channel. For today's video I'm going to be doing a February wrap-up, wrapping up all the wonderful books that I read and listened to an audiobook to this month. Hey guys, so today we are doing a wrap-up for February. I actually ended up doing pretty good this month. I'm pleased. It's not as many of the booktubers on here, but guys, I don't know how you read so much. You guys are just incredible to me. So I managed 3 physical books and 1 audiobook, and I'll talk about all of those today, as well as doing letting you know which ones I'm going to be doing like sort of a specific breakdown review of, so you can go and check out those individual videos if you want more detail about those particular books. So first and foremost, the big book that I read this month was the classic Dracula by Bram Stoker. If you guys hadn't seen, I'm actually doing a reading challenge, a read-along challenge, mostly through my Instagram, and it's called the hashtag Gothic Horror Readalong. I'm going to put that at the bottom here. Ooh. Basically, every month for the rest of the year, we will be reading a classic piece of Gothic horror fiction. I had so many books on my TBR that were rereads, and the rereads, you guys will know, they keep getting like put to the bottom of the pile because you're trying to prioritize the new books, and then you just never get around to it. So this was my motivation. So a couple of these are new to me, but the majority of them are all rereads, and this was one of my rereads. So I was very excited to visit this old friend. It has been many years and I have forgotten a lot of the nuances. So yes, I will put a wee link down below to my Instagram if you want to come check it out and join me for the next year. March's is going to be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, another great classic piece of horror literature. But let's just get into Dracula, shall I? I'll stop rambling on. So if you're unfamiliar with the particular storyline of this film, then where have you been? Are you living under a rock? This is a story that has been redone a million different ways. We have the poor innocent Jonathan Harker, a solicitor, on his way to this very remote Eastern European village where there stands this big Gothic castle to meet a Count Dracula. There they are doing a business transaction. Dracula is purchasing some property in England, and Jonathan is acting as the legal guy for that particular transaction. And also, the Count expresses how he wants to learn from Jonathan. He wants to learn social etiquette of London. He wants to learn their ways, their language, learn to make sure his English is, perfect. So Jonathan spends a lot longer in the castle than he had anticipated, and a lot of the book is, well, the entirety of the book is set up like a series of records and various accounts, rather than it being just a straightforward story being written out. So we have letters from Jonathan to his fiancée Mina, letters from Mina to her friend Lucy. We have diary entries from Mina and from Jonathan. We have diary entries from the Dr. Seward and from Van Helsing when he eventually appears. So it's all sort of set up like we are reading their records of what happened, to kind of give it almost like a credit, like credentials, to make it seem more real, which I really do. I love that, the way that's been done. Yeah, it's a really brilliant story. It's just wonderful. I love Gothic literature. I love the language. I love the settings. I just think that they did horror the proper old-fashioned way. Don't get me wrong, I love like modern horror too, but I just have, it holds a special place in my heart, that old school Victorian style horror. I just love it. I forgot though how patronizing everybody is to the women in it. Maybe I was so young when I read it the first time, I didn't twig, but there is a lot of, this is men's work. Oh, you can't tell the women anything about this. They're far too sensitive. That'll affect them. But what I do like about it is that towards the end of the book, they all realise what an idiot they've been, that probably one of the strongest people in the group and one of the ones who has helped the most and contributed the most to finding him is in fact Mina, the woman, and that hiding everything from her has not only not helped their cause, but it may have actually made it worse and made her vulnerable to Dracula. So they do acknowledge in the end that they were maybe, not giving her as much credit as they should have been. But yeah, there's just a lot of moments when I was reading it where I was like, screw you, because there's just so many times where someone in the book is like, oh, this is not for lady folk, we must hide this from the women. And I know that's a sign of the times and everything, but yeah, I'm glad that Bram had the foresight to be like, you know, you may think that you're helping here, but really the women, they're just as involved and smart as you. So yeah, I really loved it. This reread was brilliant. It was like visiting that old friend, that old familiar friend. And I recently watched the BBC adaptation, and seeing that there are a lot more in common with that new adaptation than I actually remembered there being. So yeah, this was a wonderful reread. I'm looking forward to Frankenstein next month. And if you fancy it, we're actually doing a watch along on the 28th, which actually might be after this video goes out. But we're going to be watching along a classic version of each of these Gothic horrors each month as well. And we're starting with Bram Stoker's Dracula. So if you want to get involved with that, let me know. As I said, I'll put the link to my Instagram down below. Now, the other two books that I read, I did on Kindle, so I don't have the physical book. So the first one is The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson. I've already done a deep dive review of that book, and it is wonderful, guys. If you haven't read it, go and get it immediately. It only came out this month. It is set in the deep south of America, in the bayou, in one of those kind of swampy towns where the houses are on stilts and there's snakes and alligators and just, oh, like swamp people type thing. It's wonderful. We have a young girl who, at the beginning of the book, is a child. She goes with her father and they take a witch to a woman who's given birth, and the baby doesn't make it, and they go with the witch to a deep part of the bayou that this girl's never seen before. And her father, she hears gunshots, never sees him again, and the witch comes, she goes to find out what's happened, and she discovers that the baby actually isn't dead, and instinctively tries to see if the baby gets bitten by a snake, and then the witch brings them both, and kind of they become this like makeshift family. The girl, the baby, and the witch, because this baby is special. This baby is like of the swamp. It's like kind of partly human, partly swamp monster, and it's amazing. It has an amazing way with nature. And the girl is sort of left on her own, a young teen, no father. Her mother died when she was a child, and the local pastor, who they constantly remind you in the book is cuckoo crazy, him and the local sheriff, who in the book you realise is just an evil beep, insert swear word here, they offer her a job, helping them to move weed up and down the bayou, become a drug runner essentially. And that goes on for a decade, and nobody knows about the little boy having survived, and they have a sort of peaceful existence, her and the witch and the little boy. And then one day, the pastor and the sheriff ask her, instead of moving the usual marijuana, to move a child. They hand her an unconscious small child and are like, take that up the river. And she has a decision to make. Does she try to save the child, or does she risk everything doing so? Or does she just kind of go along with it and try to sort of save herself and her little makeshift family from any repercussions that would happen if she did in fact rebel? And this child has a gift as well. When you touch the child, you're able to see everything. This child has the ability to see your birth, your death, your concerns, your anxieties, your life, your thoughts, your fears, your feelings, everything. She sees it all. And by you touching her, you see it all as well. So this child is very special, just like the boy. And inevitably she decides to save the child, and the book is about all the repercussions of that. It's full of Russian folklore, because the witch in question, the kind of makeshift mother, she is from the old country, and she brought with her the house spirits and the bannock, and we've got the Lyshi is the sort of swamp spirit, which I believe in real life is a god, but in this is a goddess. So there's all this beautiful, wonderful, rich folklore. I love the idea, the juxtaposition of this like very Eastern European, you know, myths and legends, but being placed in this completely opposite setting, moving from the cold snow of Russia, whatever, to the very hot, humid bayou swamps of the south. The characters are amazing. You really become emotionally involved in everybody, and you're so devastated if you think anything's going to happen to any of them, and you're really rooting for the good guys. You hate the bad guys. It's just a brilliantly written book. I couldn't put it down. I read a review that said that it was kind of like Neil Gaiman if he was like more horror oriented, and I would agree with that assessment, because it has all of Neil Gaiman's kind of mysticism and kind of fantasy, but in a very dark and horror filled way. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of heartache in this book, and it's beautiful. It is beautifully written. Very dark, but very beautiful. So definitely recommend that one. The next one up we have, I'll do it on this side, is Miscreations, which is a selection of short stories by various different authors, all of whom were given the exact same brief. And the brief was this: write something inspired by Frankenstein and his creation of his monster. And they were told they could go as wide or as narrow as they wanted. So there are stories in this book that are literally related directly to Frankenstein, to that legend. And then there are some that are just like, woo, so out of there. We have everything about making literal monsters to making figurative and metaphorical monsters, creating monsters out of ourselves, out of our hate. There's a lot of really good stories in there. There's a few that for me kind of missed the mark. But I overall really, really enjoyed this selection. It has something for everyone, genuinely. There's a bit of fantasy in there. There's a bit of romance in there. And there's lots of wonderful horror. And I loved how every author interpreted it and how they took something which is so familiar to all of us. Everybody knows the story of Frankenstein. Everybody knows the story of his monster and the kind of moral lessons behind that. And I love the way that they took it and they ran with it and they all turned it into something so unique and so different from one another, because none of the stories in this book are even remotely alike to one another. They were all given exactly the same brief, but every story, every poem is just completely, different from each other. So you find yourself when you're reading it that you're going just through this varied emotional response. Some moments you find something funny, then you find something quite heartbreaking, then you find something like, whew. Josh Mallerman's story, for example, that stuck with me. I was like, Christ, that is a dark ass story. Yeah, so I'm actually going to do an individual review video for that book where I'm going to kind of tell you briefly about each of the shorts involved. Not enough to spoil it, obviously, and let you know which ones were my favourites. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in this book. It just came out, I think it was on the 14th of February. So it's relatively new, but I definitely recommend that for a read. I find short stories are a great way if you're in a reading slump to get back into reading again. And I also think that horror is the perfect medium for a short story. I think that horror doesn't need to have a conclusion, and that a lot of the time a conclusion, almost no conclusion, is a better conclusion, if that makes sense. So I think that horror is just great in a short story format. So yeah, really recommend that. And the last story, which I have done actually on audiobook, it is called My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. And it was adapted for audio by Rona Munro and performed by the awesome Laura Linney. If you're unfamiliar with her, she's a badass actress. And it's about a heartbreaking story, I have to say. It's this was kindly sent to me by Penguin Books, free on audio for me to listen and review. And I listened to it in the car to and from work. And there are moments where I had to sit in the car because it's very sad at points. Lucy Barton, the main character, she ends up in hospital, severely sick enough that she could have died, but she doesn't. She's there for 9 weeks. It's touch and go at points. And one day she wakes up and her mother's at the end of her bed. And this is unusual because she basically hasn't seen her mother or brother or sister or father in many, many years. They grew up in an incredibly poverty-stricken, very unhealthy background. The father suffered from PTSD as a result of the war, and he didn't handle that well. The mother was never particularly feeling, quite cold towards her children. There are stories, for example, of how when they went to work and she was too young to be in school, they would lock her in a van all day. And at one point did that with a snake, and the psychological effect that had on her, things like that. So this is kind of strange for Lucy to find her mother at the bottom of her bed, and her mother basically stands vigil day and night, stays awake, looking after Lucy, making sure she's okay, watching over her. She's still cold. She doesn't say I love you or anything particularly comforting, but she's there for her, and it kind of explores that complicated love-hate relationship that Lucy has with her family, with her mother and her father. but particularly her mother, and the effect that that relationship and that upbringing had on how she has then addressed her own relationships with her own husband and her own children. Yeah, it's brilliant. It was, Laura Linney performs it fantastically. You mean, you can hear the heartache and sorrow in her voice at points when her voice cracks and stuff. It's really, really beautifully done. I believe this was actually a play as well. And I think I could see how brilliant it would be on stage. It would be very emotional. But yes, it's about that exploration of love and hate, that sort of line where you can still love your mum so much and want that love back in return from them so much, but at the same time admit and see all of their feelings, and how, you know, it might lead to you becoming even more like loving and clinging to your children because you don't want them to feel that distance that you had to grow up with. You want them to know that you love them. And yeah, it was really beautifully written. I've never read anything by Strout before, but I think I would be interested to read more. She has an amazing ability to capture characters and histories and emotions in an incredibly real and guttural way, so that when I was listening to it in this case, or when you're reading it, it really hits you. So yeah, beautifully written. I would recommend that as well. I would particularly recommend it in an audiobook because of the way that it's performed. I think that the story lends itself to that perfectly. But that was my month, guys. That was my February. How did your reading month go? Did you get lots read? Let me know in the comments. What did you read this month? Have you read any of the books that I mentioned? Let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts on them. And hit the like button, hit the bell button, give me a subscription. Let's be friends. Let's hang around and have lots of fun conversations about books, because nerds need fellow nerds for that. But that's me for now, guys. Bye.